Hyrule Castle has been a prime point of interest between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom ever since the announcement trailer for Tears first came out. Then known only as the sequel to Breath of the Wild, seeing it rise from the ground at the end of that trailer clearly confirmed not only that we were returning to the same version of Hyrule, but that massive changes should be expected. Welcome back, fellow Zelda enthusiasts. In today's episode of Hyrule Comparisons, we're going to explore and showcase all that stuff that have taken place around Hyrule Castle. And so without further ado, let's go. If you've watched previous entries in the series, specifically the Hyrule Field episode which borders Castletown to the south, you may remember that I decided to use this path running along the southern border as our cutoff rather than the crumbled wall. And I'm including Krenel Hills in this comparison, which is a fascinating little area cut off by the castle moat and the Hylia River because it's unlocked by the same tower in Breath of the Wild as the castle is. However, in Tears of the Kingdom, this is a different region of the map. But we've already established that for the purposes of these videos, I'll create custom borders for each regional analysis. We'll begin this tour by heading up the path through the front gate into Castletown, facing towards the central square. We will then move clockwise around the castle before heading inside to tour it, because in both games the castle had its own separate map, essentially making it a pseudo-dungeon. This area is unlocked by the central tower in Breath of the Wild, which is southwest of our starting point out in Hyrule Field. And in Tears of the Kingdom, it's unlocked by the Lookout Landing Skyview Tower, which is pretty much right behind us. Because the borders for both of these towers are determined by the river system surrounding the castle, we're dealing with an almost identical region, except for, as I noted a moment ago, Krenel Hills. Our first point of interest is right here as we head through this front gate, a double Korok spot. In Breath of the Wild, as soon as you pass through, you look up at the Hylian symbol on the north side of this wall above the door and shoot it with an arrow. There are already 2 arrows stuck in it to give you the clue, but if you shoot it with your own arrow, it'll bounce off. Whereas in Tears of the Kingdom, there's a rock on top of the archway and all you have to do is lift it up. Now, heading clockwise and hopping back over the wall for just a moment, we make our way to the Passiri Greenbelt Cave, where you'll find a few Horriblins inside and a platform with some more prizes. Defeating the Horriblins unlocks a treasure chest, and there's nothing marking the entrance to this cave in Breath of the Wild. Continuing around the edge of the castle area into an area known as Quarry Ruins, we come across our first shrine of the video, the Sheikah Kata Chuki Shrine. There's nothing in this spot in Tears, but there is a chance of Choo-Choo spawning here, and if you arrive at night, a couple of Stalkoblins might pop up where the shrine used to be. If we head west of here and climb on top of these rocks, in Tears of the Kingdom, we find the Ishodog Shrine, where there's nothing in Breath of the Wild. So for our first Sheikah Shrine and our first Zonai Shrine, each had nothing in its counterpart's location. Directly south is the Mount Gustav Well, where an Evermean tree waits for the ambush, and inside we find 2 like-likes guarding the path to a dead end with several ore deposits. In Breath of the Wild, we can't go down the well, and the Evermean is also missing, obviously, but I was hoping there would at least be a regular tree there, and there is not. There is, however, a flying guardian circling around on patrol. We'll come across lots of guardians as I go through Breath of the Wild. I'm not going to bring them all up. From here we can continue slightly northwest right up to the Karak Bridge, where we now see a Hinox sleeping on the path. But don't worry, that path leads outside of the region we're exploring today, so no need to engage. We also find the Karak Bridge well over here in both games. Of course, this one was also blocked off and purely decorative, but now, dropping down to explore inside, you'll find a few fortified pumpkins and a note on the table written by Chef Ori Tamu, the self-proclaimed master of cuisine. This note highlights how he lived down here for a while until the upheaval, and then decided to explore other newly formed caves. Heading northeast of here to the edge of the Quarry Ruins, we find a double Korok spot, or a quadruple Korok spot, if you will. And there's something even more interesting than that. Check it out. On top of the hill in Breath of the Wild, we must pick up a rock and carry it to fill in the gap in the rocks, forming a circle that's missing one. And in Tears of the Kingdom, dancing around this spot, you must catch the fairy lights. This marks the first time ever in the series where I've found an exact match Korok. They're both green with the same shaped leaf. Then, just down this hill, slightly to the east in Breath of the Wild, there's another complete the rock puzzle, but instead of a circle, it's a spiral type design. And where that rock spiral used to be is now a block shaped puzzle to figure out. These two Koroks don't match at all, but if they did, for the purposes of this series, I'd consider that mind blowing. Continuing northwest from here and crossing over a small river, we find our way to the Noya Nea Shrine in Breath of the Wild. To find it, you must blow out some rock from the side of the hill. In Tears, a Skyrock with some Dazzle Fruit has fallen over this opening to permanently conceal it, but moving over to the other side of the hill, we see a hole in this rock which looks like a cave entrance, but it's actually the Hyrule Castle Moat West Chasm. There's nothing marking this spot in Breath of the Wild. And back up on top of this hill, but not all the way to the top. In Tears of the Kingdom, there's a little stump platform which initiates a race to the finish. You must reach the goal line before the time runs out. The finish line is directly over a regular tree stump with a stone two-handed axe stuck in it. But in Breath of the Wild, this regular stump was actually another little stump platform with a pinwheel that would spawn a jumping acorn above the trees that needed to be shot. Heading east in both games on top of the huge hill is a stone talus. It's a rare ore talus in Breath of the Wild and a battle talus hanging with Bokos in Tears of the Kingdom. We've seen this enemy upgrade before, for example in the Great Plateau comparison, making it a somewhat common occurrence, but we definitely don't find a battle talus everywhere a stone talus was in Breath of the Wild. Heading back over this river and within the walls of West Castle Town again, we make our way to our first of the 5 pillars in Breath of the Wild that housed Guardians. These were always extremely interesting features in the first game, and they are, of course, completely absent in Tears. As we visit these spots, you'll probably agree some are more interesting than others. Here in the first one, there's nothing but torn up earth and rock. I don't know about you, but I would have really loved to see a chasm opening at each one of these spots, but we got a few other surprises instead, as you'll see. But first, heading north and through the Castletown prison, there's yet another double Korok spot where, in Breath of the Wild, you must offer a rusty shield to the offering statues, and in Tears of the Kingdom, there's a Fairy Lights Korok to catch. Funny enough, these 3 offering statues are still there, but their bowls have been removed, and the Korok is racing around in an oval track shape that reminds me of Baby Park from Mario Kart Double Dash. Moving north towards the shore, there's a dock with a sailboat. In Breath of the Wild, the boat is in the water ready to sail, and in Tears of the Kingdom, it's on the shore and needs to be launched. This changes obviously because now we have Ultimate, whereas before there was no practical way to get a boat off of dry land into the water. Now for our second of the Guardian pillars, we continue towards this little island in the middle of the river system. Again, where the pillar was is torn up dirt and rock, rough land, but this time at the base where the pillar was, there are 2 piles of flint and arrows, which is just an odd combo, and I've never seen piles of collectibles just lying around like this, so I thought it was significant enough to mention. There's a lift up the rock Korok to find here in Breath of the Wild, and in Tears of the Kingdom, instead of only 1 Korok, there are 2, where you have to reunite them by bringing one from across the river over here. The one that's waiting for his friend to join him where the pillar used to be doesn't spawn in until you've interacted with the one across the way. Alright, so now continuing northeast, technically outside of the regional tower areas for both games, just so that we can keep all the Guardian pillars together as a set, we must cross completely over the river directly behind the castle near the docks. Remnants of where the pillar used to be in Breath of the Wild are made up of layered rock more so than they are for the other 4. This is true in both games, but now there's a square-shaped cutout marking exactly where the base was, which is unique to this former pillar spot. Moving slightly southeast across the water onto the island in the middle of the river system is where the 4th Guardian pillar once stood. We now find the Zonai Sipapa shrine here on a mound of torn up land. Staying on this island, we also find Hyrule Forest Park, where in Tears, Kato is hanging out and gives you a clue to find Impa to kick off the Geoglyphs quest. This area, to me, is prettier in Tears than it is in Breath of the Wild for whatever reason. There is sort of a double Korok spot in that there are 2 fountains here, and in Breath of the Wild on one there's a rock to lift up, and then in Tears of the Kingdom around the other there's a Korok fairy lights to catch. However, to the left of Hyrule Forest Park, there's a Gloomspawn in Tears, and in Breath of the Wild, to the right, there's a Stalnox, and just south of here, there's a Guardian Stalker. So be careful, especially at night. And I should also mention, while we're on this island, there's a double treasure spot right on the shore under a rock with a cutout. In Breath of the Wild, you must blow away Bombable Rock to find the chest with a Frantic Bow inside. The Tears chest is buried in the dirt and contains 5 Bright Bloom seeds. And the last thing to note before leaving this little island is the Hyrule Castle Moat East Chasm, which you must drop down the west side of the island into the water and swim inside to get to. There's nothing marking this opening here in Breath of the Wild, just like the hidden chasm on the other side I showed earlier in the tour. Now on to Krenel Hills, where we find one of the most rare of things to find in the series yet, the coveted double shrine spot. This is only the second one I've found so far, the first being in the Hyrule Field comparison, and it's here in the remnants of this gigantic hollowed out tree, of which we find several here. The Sheikah Shrine is the Namika Oz, and the Zonai Shrine is the Ren Is. Directly south of here, there are 2 hollowed out trees that are now filled with water where Gloomspawns apparently live, one in each according to the interactive map, but I could only ever get one to come out to play. It used to be dry inside in these stumps during the oncoming calamity, with treasure chests filled with bundles of fire and bomb arrows instead. And they were definitely both guarded by an ice Wizzrobe and an electric Wizzrobe respectively. And to the west of those guys, inside this fallen over tree trunk, there's a double Korok spot. You lift up the rock in Breath of the Wild, and you gotta catch a Fairy Lights Korok in Tears of the Kingdom. And a little further west of here, in Tears, is the entrance to the Krenel Hills Cave, which has some massive deposits of luminous stone and a luminous talus hanging out inside. One of those luminous stone deposits blocks the way to a treasure chest containing the Barbarian armor, which we now know is not as associated with the Zonai as we once thought. There was nothing marking the hillside in Breath of the Wild to show us where the cave entrance would eventually be. Exiting from this cave, we'll head south, where we find one more double Korok spot on this island, on yet another fallen over hollowed out tree trunk. In Breath of the Wild, there's a pinwheel that spawns some balloons that we need to shoot. And on this tree trunk in Tears is a dandelion we need to slice and then catch before it hits the ground. And get this, both of them are blue with the same shaped leaf. Identical matches, making this the second exact match double Korok spot in the video, which is just crazy because it was really beginning to feel like an intentional choice from Nintendo to swap out every Korok in the overworld. One of you even brought up the idea in the comments on my Elden comparison. So now we know for a fact that there are definitely some Koroks out there that have resided in the same place for however many years. Now let's move west back over the river system and back towards Castletown, where in Tears we find the Yamio Shrine and a Cherry Blossom tree, and nothing at all in either of these spots in Breath of the Wild. We can head directly west from here back inside the walls of Castletown to find the Hyrule Castletown Ruins Well. Jumping down inside to explore, we find a kind of maze of waterways and some Horriblins living down there, but it's not really a maze so much as it is a big circle with a knight's halberd hidden in a treasure chest in the center. Heading more or less straight north of here for just a moment past the Hyrule Cathedral, or the remnants thereof, we find the 5th and final Guardian Pillar location, where there's nothing to see but rubble in Tears of the Kingdom. So now let's make our way towards the central square of Castletown. The map shows the slow progress of pathway reconstruction in this area, and of course there's the Kionis Shrine in Tears of the Kingdom. In Breath of the Wild, there's just a big pile of malice in this spot. And in the center of Central Square, on the iconic fountain, there's a double Korok spot. In Breath of the Wild, you must fly over from the platform on top of the wall just south of the fountain, west of the gate we entered from at the beginning, and in Tears, just a rock to pick up here. Now, of course, like I said earlier, there are tons of Guardians around this entire area in Breath of the Wild, and there will continue to be more. Some have been replaced by Stalnox, treasure chests, cooking pots, Koroks, or even one of Hudson's and Addison's signs that keep upright. There's also another gloom spawn that I could not get to spawn, so no need to focus on all that, because now it's time to head into the castle where the Guardian presence gets boosted even more, making getting around the castle in Breath of the Wild significantly more dangerous. To explore this entire place, it might get kind of random at times, but that's okay. At this point, I just want to make sure we don't miss anything as I generally explore the entire castle itself. To best ensure this, we'll make our way around the ground level, or what I'll refer to as the castle bottom half or lower half. Then we'll head up to the top half section that's been raised during the upheaval. Of course, going clockwise around each time for consistency. Okay, so as we enter through the front gates, we'll take the path that curves around to the left and enter through the first door on the right. By the way, entering through this door is the backup route in Breath of the Wild speedrunning. You must go through these two gates, lifting them with either Cryonis or Ultra Hand, and head up the stairs. In Breath of the Wild, the first gate is raised until you run through it, then it falls, trapping you inside. When you get to the top of these stairs, you couldn't immediately turn right in Breath of the Wild because the entryway was blocked by tons of malice. So even though you can freely pass through this doorway in Tears, we'll check that room out as one of the last things we do before moving up to the top half of the castle. So then, heading left down this hall, we see a Lizalfos by a cooking pot in Breath of the Wild, which speedrunners of that game are extremely familiar with. In Tears of the Kingdom, that cooking pot is no longer there, but the little clay pot laying on its side is, now in a pool of gloom. Past the old speedrunning cooking pot spot is where the hall would continue down the way in Breath of the Wild, and this is where the castle is broken away from the ground in Tears. So again, we'll come back to explore this part of the castle in a little bit. Because you may have noticed in Tears of the Kingdom, we're technically not in the castle yet. The minimap is still not showing that we're there. In fact, my autosave points will either refer to specific locations, like the Royal Hidden Passage or the Observation Room, and if nothing else, we'll default to calling this Hyrule Field. But in Breath of the Wild, we've been on the castle map since shortly before walking through that front gate to get onto the central island. Anyway, heading down the stairs from the cooking pot intersection takes us past a bombable wall on our way to the guard's chamber. Behind this wall we used to find a treasure chest with 3 ancient arrows. This has been replaced with a newly installed trapdoor that I have no explanation for. Who could have or would have done this between the two games is a mystery to me. But however it got here, this door leads to the Royal Hidden Passage. If we follow the passage until you eventually get to somewhere in the middle of a gigantic spiral staircase, taking the stairs up heads back to the observation room, which again we'll get to a little bit later. And heading down to the bottom of the spiral staircase leads us to a plaque that reads, "Deep beneath this land, our mighty first ruler imprisoned the Demon King." This plaque stands in front of a wall of breakable, bombable rock that will lead us out of the castle, eventually back to Lookout Landing. This is how the royal family was to escape if ever the castle was being completely taken over. We won't go all the way through because there's nothing to compare here in Breath of the Wild, so just know that it exists. So back to where we entered the trapdoor, we can continue into the next room, the guard's chamber. In Breath of the Wild, there are a couple of Lizalfos hanging around a campfire and a moblin with a royal guard's claymore standing in front of some statues, one of them with a royal regular claymore. If you have the Breath of the Wild DLC installed, these Lizalfos guard a treasure chest containing the royal guard's boots. In Tears, there are no more Lizalfos hanging around the campfire, and no moblin with 2 sweet swords. Under the stairs leading down here, we'd get a shard of Naedra's Fang from one treasure chest, and a Savage Lionel shield from the second one. Now under the stairs where we got those items, there are 2 bokoblins waiting to ambush, and we can grab some free arrows stuck in the wall that they've been using for target practice that weren't there before. Then there are 2 more chests on a little overlooking balcony up top, accessible via a broken stairway that would have connected right next to where the Lizalfos were chilling. They contain a silver rupee and 5 bomb arrows and are found next to a falcon bow, among other things, in Breath of the Wild. There's now only 1 treasure chest up here containing a Royal Guard uniform, a pretty cool prize swap in my opinion, and it sits right next to the Traveler's Bow, which is a downgrade from the Falcon. If we head up the stairs from where we entered this room, there's a way back outside using a switch that must be held down with a barrel to open the gate. Heading out to the left, we find ourselves at the top of the path where we were a moment ago, where we entered through the door further down. The path is clear all the way in Tears, but there's a Malice eyeball blocking the way in Breath of the Wild. Continuing up this path around the curve, we're led to the first gatehouse. In Breath of the Wild, this was a death trap. As soon as you would enter, the gate would close and you'd be forced to fight a Lionel. You can still see the remnants of this gate in Tears of the Kingdom at the entryway. Now this room looks more like a temporary shelter for Hylians working on the castle. And of course, this is where we're first guided by Purah to go find Haaz and initiate the quest to get the paraglider in Tears of the Kingdom. Nobody or nothing is waiting to rendezvous here in Breath of the Wild. Heading back out the door we just came through and backtracking down this curved path a little, going over the wall and dropping down to the left, there's a lot to explore at the lowest level of the castle. Starting at this passageway right towards the front facing Hyrule Castle moat, and it is visible if you look right from the main entry of the path. This leads to the West Passage, which is blocked off by Bombable Rock in both games shortly after entering, which leads to a rail system. One small difference I should note, besides the treasure chest filled with diamond inside in Breath of the Wild, are the mini taluses. 3 of them are around here in both games, but they're frozen taluses in Breath of the Wild and just regular little guys in Tears of the Kingdom. And I realized while scripting this video that I completely forgot how to move carts along rails without Zonai devices. I just had to walk it. This little rail track path is blocked by rock in Tears of the Kingdom, but not in Breath of the Wild. Other than that, it's completely untouched and runs a route along the outer edge of the island to this room. In Tears of the Kingdom, we find a group of Bokos, including a boss Boko. And in Breath of the Wild, there are no enemies here, but there are several decayed guardians frozen in formation, but completely deactivated and harmless. And with these guardians, there's a nest with a couple of bird eggs because this water over here was warm enough to be a hot spring, and you need that to hard boil an egg and drop it into the offering statue's plate to get a Korok seed. In Tears of the Kingdom, the water isn't hot enough to be a hot spring anymore, and the statues have mysteriously disappeared. Heading up the path and leading out of here, down the trail, through the first doorway, which is covered in Bombable Rock in Breath of the Wild, the path to the right is completely closed off with dirt and rubble in both games, so we don't know what continues here. Making a left leads us to where in Tears of the Kingdom we see the castle has broken away on the next right side path. But heading to the right in Breath of the Wild leads to a room with a moblin where you could scale up the wall to explore other places, which we will eventually do, but heading back down the left path takes us to the lockup. I typically like to enter into the lockup from the back way, accessible using Cryonis or Ultra Hand to lift the gate. There are no more prisoners in here, but there are a couple of electric likes, but we don't like them. The switches to open up the prison cells in the lockup activate differently between games. They used to switch just by being hit. Now they need to have something ultra handed to them to give enough leverage or torque to move the lever. Now, in Breath of the Wild, going through to the far room at the end of the lockup, when Link enters, the gate locks him in, trapping him inside with a Stalnox. Once defeated, you're rewarded with the Hylian shield, and the gate opens back up. In Tears, this gate is already closed, essentially trapping a Gloom spawn inside. It seems now the only way to access this room is by destroying the rock above. There's nothing here in Breath of the Wild, but there should have been, because this would have been the lowering platform to bring the Stalnox, or probably it was a Hinox at the time, down into this chamber so that it could eventually be used as a test of strength for potential soldiers and knights of the royal family. If you look up, instead of seeing breakable rock, you'll see dirt covering this grate in Breath of the Wild. We see the lowering platform on the ground with a treasure chest on top of it once we break through, and a plaque referencing the test of strength striking down a giant monster to become recognized as a Knight of the Kingdom. And instead of the Hylian shield, you get the Royal Hyrulean fabric after defeating the Gloom spawn. But the gate still doesn't open. I honestly don't know if you can open this door. It seems like it should, but I could not figure it out. Heading out of the lockup and directly through the back into the docks, in Breath of the Wild we find Lizalfos guarding this area. There's no longer any Lizalfos presence here, and where a great flame blade was once on display has now been replaced with a decayed traveler's claymore. There's also lots of gloom around down here where there was never any malice in Breath of the Wild. As we climb the staircase to get out of here, the presence of the gloom is explained because there's a gloom spawn up at the top. Once you defeat it and continue on, we find torches surrounding a big torch that needs to be lit to reveal the Sa Kosa shrine. And lighting the big torch now spawns a treasure chest in that exact spot where the shrine popped up, and this is how we get the Hylian shield in Tears of the Kingdom. We can continue up the stairs until we find a blocked entryway that you use Magnesis to open, leading to the library. But instead of the blocked entrance in Tears of the Kingdom, there's just a gaping hole created by the upheaval, so we'll come back to the library soon. For now, as we continue along the outer wall and drop down, we find an entryway to the East Passage, with a rail system just like the West Passage had. Along the way in Tears, we pass an ice lake, and at the end of the rails, there's a treasure chest with 20 rupees inside, a cooking pot, and some bomb flowers. But other than that, using the word passage to describe this area is misleading because it's a dead end. But in Breath of the Wild, the East Passage was an actual passage. There was of course no ice lake in here, but there was some ice in the water, which I found to be a strange yet interesting swap between the games. Anyway, the path leads you to a standoff with a rare stone talus, which creates an updraft once you beat it, where you can find another passageway blocked off by a Malice eyeball, which unblocks yet another entrance to the library. Breath of the Wild really wants you to go read, but like I said, we'll come back to the library as we get to the upper section of the castle soon. Continuing clockwise to the next significant location of the castle, we find ourselves in the dining hall. In Breath of the Wild, there were moblins on either side of the room, a royal bow hidden up on top of the chandelier, and tons of food to collect in here. In Tears of the Kingdom, there are no enemies, but there is a traveler's bow on top of the chandelier, and a few crates have been delivered. And the little fence over the fireplace where the Royal Guard spear was is now completely open, allowing you to go pick up a soldier's bow if you want. And also, after completing more of the game, a Hylian named Bermano, who's looking to find some good recipes to bring back to Lookout Landing, will come hang out in front of a recipe for crunchy fried rice, which was not there during the Calamity days. Heading out of the dining hall is where we again find the path cuts off in Tears of the Kingdom due to the upheaval, but in both games we can go down the stairs back to the room from the beginning of the castle tour that acts as a hub to connect the observation room and that first hallway we entered from. Heading down the stairs in Breath of the Wild, we see a Malice eyeball sitting right in the center, and there's also a moblin in here as opposed to two Horriblins. And while shooting the eyeball does open up access to the observation room, it does not unblock the door leading back to the original hallway we started from. That Malice is stuck there, which is unfortunate. Anyway, there's another Moblin and Malice eyeball just up the stairs, and the biggest change in here is that there's a Hylian bird statue standing in Breath of the Wild that's been tipped over on its side now, revealing the other opening to the Royal Hidden Passage I showed off a bit ago. This trapdoor makes tons more sense because it can be explained by saying it was always there, just hidden by the statue the whole time. And it's accessible now because it got tipped on its side, probably due to the tremendous tremors of the upheaval. Heading up the stairs in here, out onto the balcony, you can pick up some arrows in both games, but in Breath of the Wild there's also a royal bow and 3 more ancient arrows in a chest. And that's the full bottom half of the castle. We can now head upwards to explore the top half. A fitting place to begin our tour of the raised portion of the castle is where it's broken off down the hall from the speedrunning cooking pot we started around. The breakup happens in the exact spot where in Breath of the Wild we find a wall of Malice that can be cleared by shooting the eyeball on the ceiling. You can head straight down the long way of this hall and then eventually make a left in Breath of the Wild, but this is a dead end in Tears of the Kingdom. If we take that left turn, it takes us to the top of a really tall room with the moblin we found ourselves in just before going to the lockup. If you can find it, let me know, and if your explanation helps me find this room, I will gift you a membership to the channel. I've got cute emotes. Backtracking for a moment down this hallway again, there was one other path you could take where there's another Malus eyeball blocking a spiral staircase in Breath of the Wild. The stairs are clear in Tears, and in both games there's a sword and a shield off to the side in the dirt behind some debris, and in Breath of the Wild you'll also find a treasure chest between them with 3 more ancient arrows. At the top of this staircase in Breath of the Wild, we're immediately greeted by a Guardian Sentinel. Of course, there's no more Guardian here in Tears, but there is a firelight hanging from the ceiling just a little further over. You used to be able to continue exploring further out this way, but now the ground is all crumbled away. And so turning around to continue clockwise, we see an ice light hanging from the ceiling on this side. We'll pass by these stairs for now and continue the path down, which leads through a tunnel. It's a pretty safe tunnel in Breath of the Wild, but it houses a small army of Horriblins in Tears of the Kingdom, so look out. Coming out on the other side, we see a Guardian in the rubble in Breath of the Wild, next to where we find the Zonai Saruta Bomek shrine on top of a rock protrusion. There used to be a big slab of rock which we needed to use stasis to lift off of a treasure chest containing Naedra's scale. We can head back inside from here, which leads us down some stairs, and in Breath of the Wild we find a Malus eyeball blocking the way, easily killed, finally taking us to the library. There were tons of Lizalfos in here in Breath of the Wild, but it's empty in Tears until you're ready for one of the battles with Phantom Zelda. There used to be a couple recipes found in here on just empty display boards now. But one new feature are these torches that were in both games, but now lighting them brings up a treasure chest on a mound of dirt which contains a gold rupee. There is no mound of dirt in Breath of the Wild, it's clean ground. And if we start pulling away the camouflage sections of bookshelves, behind door number 1 is the old hidden passage in Breath of the Wild, which leads us back down to where we lit the torches to reveal the Sheikah Shrine. And in Tears we're led back outside, of course. Behind door number 2 on the opposite side of the library brings us to a few stairs in this little room where we get a Knight's Claymore and another treasure chest containing a shard of Dinral's spike in Tears of the Kingdom. And we get a Stone Smasher and a treasure chest with a silver rupee in Breath of the Wild. We can also see Sheikah technology peeking through this wall. It looks a lot like one of the Guardian pillars, but I know that's not what it is. It doesn't make any sense if you look at the map. And behind door number 3 we have the King's Study. In Breath of the Wild there's a treasure chest with a gold rupee right inside the doorway. The treasure chest in here in Tears is front and center when you walk in, and this is where you get the Royal Guard's boots. There's also a royal shield in here, and the King's Journal is no longer on the desk. In Breath of the Wild, the King's Journal talks about Zelda's birth, keeping traditions of the royal family, the fortune teller's predictions about calamity that seems to be coming true, not to mention the death of Queen Rome, which was sudden and unexpected, and how Zelda handled this tragedy, because she was only 6 years old at the time. Then behind door number 4, there was the path that would have led back down to where the Stone Talus fight was with the updraft, but this route is barricaded from this direction as well in Tears of the Kingdom. Exiting the library from the opposite side we entered, we see a Royal Claymore stuck in the dirt and rubble on this side in Tears, but it was a great Frostblade found here in Breath of the Wild. I suppose a change like this could be explained as explorers coming through and plundering the castle, and whoever found the Great Frostblade didn't have enough inventory, so they had to drop a weapon. But really, who swaps a Great Frostblade for a Royal Claymore? I digress. So heading through the doorway to the right, we see a Lizalfos down the hall and to the right. In both games, he's an archer, but in Breath of the Wild, he shoots bomb arrows, while in Tears of the Kingdom, he shoots regular arrows. We can head down the far way to the left where yet another archer Lizalfos hangs out. And when entering through the door, this was one of my favorite rooms in Breath of the Wild because it's part of the old speedrun route where you would whistle to confuse the moblin, throw a weapon to knock him down, and sneak up behind him for the kill, and grab a Royal Guard's bow among other things around the room. Unfortunately, there's nothing to compare here in Tears because this room also seems to have been completely destroyed by the breakup of the Upheaval. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, just like with the other room, and if your advice helps me find this room in Tears of the Kingdom, I will gift you a membership to the channel. Looking from the hallway to where the door was, there's a waterfall pouring instead. However, in Breath of the Wild, we can head up to the balcony and backtrack down the hall to show how this room leads to the dining hall, and if we take that waterfall and ride it up top using Zora armor, it'll spit us out at the second gatehouse, another death trap with a Lynel in Breath of the Wild, but a safe place in Tears of the Kingdom. At least until you progress a little bit more through the game. And now, since we're a little higher up, let's continue moving around to Princess Zelda's bedroom. There used to be a moblin in here waiting in front of the fireplace wielding an Edge of Duality, but not anymore. There's still a Royal Guard's bow on the mantle in both games, but it hangs differently. And also in both games, there's a pack of arrows on the floor in the exact same position. Now there's a Royal Guard's claymore in the dirt and rubble leading outside of her room, which has always been blocked off, but it looks like part of the structure has crumbled in here, blocking off one of the openings to her balcony. And behind this clothes changing divider in Tears, we find a treasure chest containing the Royal Guard's cap, completing the ensemble. In Breath of the Wild, there's a silver rupee inside. Heading up, I'd like to note that this is the elevation in Breath of the Wild where Calamity's presence makes itself known by the way the sky fills with malice. You can observe by hopping up and jumping back down, and while looking outside, how it'll get ominous and then clear up. Just a funny bit of info I actually already covered somewhere in my Breath of the Wild Useless series, but of course this doesn't happen in Tears of the Kingdom because the final boss is not hanging out upstairs, he's chilling down in the basement. Anyway, as we cross this little walkway outside, in Tears of the Kingdom it falls when you step on it. In this section that breaks away, in Breath of the Wild we'd have a memory to recover, number 12, Father and Daughter, where she's all hopeful about the Guardians with Link, and then King Rhoam enters like a little mini-boss and they have an argument about how she is or should be spending her time preparing for the Calamity. Making our way across to Princess Zelda's study, we find a Silent Princess in both games, and then another Royal Guard's bow and a treasure chest with a Royal Guard sword in Tears of the Kingdom. And now we're ready to head to the Sanctum. Now I could run around outside and explore all the Guardians and Sentinels and enemy swaps. There are some Bokoblins, and some of the exterior wall has crumbled a little bit more. Nothing too crazy. Heading inside then, there's dirt and rock covering over the centerpiece of the floor which broke apart after defeating the Blight Cannons in Breath of the Wild, leading down to the Astral Observatory where you'd fight Calamity Ganon. Now obviously there's no reason to actually go down here in normal gameplay in Tears of the Kingdom, but I did want to see if you could find the Astral Observatory or anything like it down underneath, so I clipped through the floor, and there is some kind of trapped room down here where I was able to look around for a little bit before getting completely stuck. How cool would it have been if they actually left that room in there though? I cannot explain. Back in the main room, there are torches up on the royal throne area we can light, which will move the bird statue off to the side and reveal the treasure chest containing the champion's leathers. Lighting these torches does absolutely nothing in Breath of the Wild. We can make our way farther up through the spiral staircase to a room where we used to be able to see Calamity's cocoon. And in this room in Breath of the Wild, if you had the DLC, there's a treasure chest containing the Royal Guard's cap. We can continue up even higher from here using a ladder to climb up the tower. In Tears of the Kingdom, there's a crumbled spot where we get the Dusk Bow. And there's one more double Korok spot at the top of the castle, both using fairy lights so that you can examine when you've climbed all the way up there. I hope you enjoyed this tour of the castle. Did I miss anything cool? Let me know in the comments below. If you made it this far, thank you so very much for watching. Please leave a like on the video while you're heading out. Maybe even throw a request for the next area you'd like to see compared, and subscribe to make sure you catch that episode when it drops. And until next time, stay cool and always keep punching out there. Aloha.